Hi Peaches, it's Shaaba, welcome back to my channel and thank you for clicking on another video. So the news lately has been fun. I'm honestly trying to limit my exposure to news and politics as of late due to it being like hugely doom scrolly. If you're doing the same, I do not blame you. There is one thing though that has caught my eye that I thought was kind of worth talking about. And it's the idea of the 4B movement. If you're anything like me, it's a term that the algorithm has been serving quite a lot and I just couldn't help but look into it. Particularly in the States right now, a wave of women seem to be denouncing men. Not just ew men, as in refusing to date men, refusing to have lives in any way intertwined with men, in light of how the majority of men in the States have been voting in a way that's disrespectful to women's rights. Well, hang on, it's more than disrespectful. It is absolutely disgusting, inhumane, and downright dystopian in 2024. This was not on my bingo card. The first thing I saw was this. If I can't have a say over my body medically, No Nut November is going to be no nut ever. 10 out of 10, gotta love the meme humor, I see you. Sure, typical internet discourse, but then I saw this. Doing my part as an American woman by breaking up with my Republican boyfriend last night and officially joining the 4B movement this morning. A white American woman. And then I saw this really long thread, again by a white American woman, about her and her bestie legit just roommates. I'm not trying to erase it, they really are just roommates who have been living together, who have adopted a child, who are having this grand old life where they're both still very much attracted to men but refuse to interact with them in any meaningful way because ew at their world politic views and the state of women's safety right now. And everything in the comments was like, yes, 4B, and I'm like, what is 4B? So I figured I'd come on here today to answer that question and talk a little bit about the concept, because I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how I feel about it. From doing my own research, I encourage you to do the same. Don't trust everything you hear on the internet, kids. 4B is a radical feminist movement that started in South Korea in the 2010s. The term B roughly translates to no. So the 4Bs for no's are no dating men, no wah with men, no marriage to men, and no giving birth. 4 no's. And up until this week, I really didn't know that this was a thing, which isn't surprising because Western frameworks of superiority means that we often don't know too much about what's happening in other areas of the world. South Korea, meanwhile, has the lowest birth rates in the world. Their fertility rate as of 2023 stands at 0.7, which means that each South Korean cis woman will have on average 0.7 or 7/10 of a baby. Do not start thinking about which limbs are pixelated. Obviously, it's impossible to have 7/10 of a baby. Stats are a funny thing, and the real life application of that means that on average, most South Korean women are not having children in their lifetime. They're having less than one, no kids. Now, the threshold statistic to maintain a country's population is 2.1. 2.1, 0.7, you do the math. In South Korea, the birth rate has been this low since the 80s. It's a grand old time and longer than the 4B movement, but the 4B movement specifically came about in the 2010s as a response to a number of things happening, which may seem a little bit familiar. The first being economic insecurities among young adults. Where have we heard that one before? The second is the incredibly high rising costs of raising children, which I think goes in arm, to be fair, with economic insecurity alongside the next trigger, which is astronomically high property prices. Honestly, it's like we're all just people dealing with the same thing or something. The other bubbling trigger is a super ingrained patriarchal culture, which has led to a lot of women pushing against those traditional norms and therefore against the more traditionally aspirational roles of marriage and motherhood. There was one specific event that really made that 4B movement pop. But with all these things happening in the background and South Korea having particularly low fertility rates, the government introduced a number of incentives to try and encourage the population to have kids. Things like giving parents new grants. They've also offered larger parental leave from work, both maternity and paternity leave, and also subsidies to help pay for that astronomically priced childcare. It's a model that seems to have worked really well in Scandi countries, but lo and behold, South Korea still seems to be pretty babyless, and in more recent years, around 65% of women surveyed are still wanting that babyless dink life. Well, is it dink? Maybe it's not dink. Living that good old dink life means that you actually, as a couple, have the funds to go on holiday, to go to the cinema, to eat out at restaurants, to do things that parents often report struggling with because of the cost of having kids. But actually this isn't that, because the 4B movement specifically does not like the idea of those relationships, those meaningful relationships with men, which is quite an extreme stance to take in terms of shutting down the patriarchy, really not integrating with men. And why is it that they're doing that? Because this idea of relationships and is deemed to be an extension, the beginnings, the foundations, right, of the patriarchal family structure. I use the word extreme, the official term is as radical, right? Radical feminism. But what is it that actually means? If we summarize that real quick, that might be useful, because Lord knows it's used incorrectly by many toughs. For example, trans exclusionary radical feminists like to call themselves radical feminists, but it's not a radical feminist stance at all. It's just being an arsehole. There's genuinely nothing radical about bigotry or transphobia. It's like the least radical thing. Discrimination, in fact, is the most annoyingly reliable thing that we've seen throughout history. But no, radical feminism, not just transphobia, actual feminism, is a view on the approach of how feminism fixes, repairs, right, to get to a truly equal feminist state. And it calls for a radical reordering of society where male supremacy is eliminated in every context, which is quite a radical approach, right, of metaphorically metaphorically burning everything down and starting again. Because no matter how many times we try to revamp, renovate, reconstruct what we already have, all of our existing systems are built on a model of men dominating women. And so the only way to get rid of that is to get rid of those foundations and start again. No crumbs, no stains, no sauce. And I think it's also important to note that radical feminism doesn't oppose men. Whilst I'm sure there probably are radical feminists out there, or feminists of any kind, who would like to see certain men flung into a dungeon, the idea of radical feminism isn't about being a man hater. It's about being a patriarchy hater, the system that puts men above women. So it's not calling for the eradication of men, okay? No one is saying here that we are going to Thanos snap men of any kind away. And like many movements in society, the 4B movement specifically gained traction when this patriarchal society reared its very ugly head in Korea in 2016, when a woman's life was taken by a man who claimed that he did it because women ignore him. That criminal was then later not charged with a hate crime, and in response to that and the surrounding misogynistic content, the 4B movement really popped, along with the motto of the 4Bs: no marriage, no procreation, no relationship, no sex. It is therefore hugely unsurprising to see a similar response, considering the parallels that are currently happening with the states and the latest election results. Women are seeing a candidate who has literally been convicted of a crime, crimes for that matter, and whose appointment as president ripples into this legitimizing, quote unquote, legitimizing misogyny and genuinely regressing fundamental human rights. Surprise, surprise, women are not really the biggest fan of the patriarchy right now. Flipping back to Korea for a moment, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is the beauty and the skincare industry. They are, after all, the 10th largest beauty market in the world and in the top 4 exporting countries of cosmetics, alongside the States, France, and Germany. In other words, the perception of the beauty standards and therefore the pressure to comply and conform to beauty standards must be hella high in South Korea. And that's just what I'm hearing, little old me here in the UK, about a country on the other side of the world. Imagine what it must feel like to be a woman in South Korea feeling that direct pressure firsthand. The 4B movement envelops this resistance too, with this conceptual idea of a corset. When I think corset, I think Elizabeth Turner. Yes, I am talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, but in all representations that we've seen of corsets, they're stifling, they're painful, they are fake, because no woman's waist is this thin. And so the 4B movement and this idea of the corset captures the sexual, social, bodily, all forms of oppression that women face, which of course includes toxic and unrealistic and unmaintainable and unachievable beauty standards. And so the 4B's response to this, in order to defy that pressure of having to look and maintain and be and act and buy and put on skincare and makeup in a certain way, they are destroying makeup, they are rejecting fashion, and they are also shaving their heads, which again makes sense as to why my timelines at the moment are featuring this kind of content of white American women shaving their heads. And that brings us back to what is happening in the States right now. After the election results, where Trump has won a second term, online videos of the 4B movement have been trending, and the Google search term for 4B has been up by 450%. And whilst it might be really tricky to determine the scale of 4B in the States and also in South Korea, and just how widespread and pertinent it's become, there is no denying the amount of discourse that's been happening online among young American women. Whether that be women shaving their heads, vowing to join, boycotting businesses even, to leaving their partners. One woman interviewed by CNN, who's seemingly become a bit of a spokesperson about the 4B movement in the States, said that she learnt about it a few years ago in 2022, and since hasn't dated or slept with men, and realised that she's actually better off alone. Pollard says that she plans on using her own resources to support herself and still wants children, but would like to raise that child alone. And went on to clarify that this isn't an act of vengeance, but an act of putting yourself first and being able to remind women that actually there is a choice for you out there. You can advocate, you can spread awareness, and you can remind people that they have options, especially people who may not realise that's the case because they're brought up in really Republican, conservative networks where you're just taught, right, that this is the one way to be. You don't even question the status quo. Very High School Musical. And personally, regardless of my thoughts on the 4B movement generally, I think this is a really powerful reminder to have. This idea that people generally, but definitely as women, we have options. We are powerful. Now, I'm not sure how massively this is going to stick and how many people are going to be receptive to that message, especially because if we look at the most recent statistics from the election result, an alarming number of women, specifically white women and Hispanic women, make that make sense, have been voting for the policies that literally regress their own rights. How, I will never know. But I'm really hopeful that this message of option, of freedom, of autonomy, even if the 4B movement doesn't. So why is it that I'm seeming against 4B? I just want to clarify, like, I'm not against it. Like with everything, I think people like to feel like they're part of a community, part of something greater than oneself, especially when we're feeling really helpless. And the problem with boxes is that as people, we're not designed to fit in them. So there are always going to be parts of that box that don't fit you. I'm not saying that the 4B movement is not a good thing. I'm also not saying it is a good thing. I'm asking you to think critically and to make choices for yourself, being fully informed, because yes, it's so easy to get swept up in things, and especially things that sound like, on the face of it, pretty kick-ass, right? Women defying the patriarchy? Who doesn't want to get aboard that train? But I wanted to end this video by highlighting 3 things that I question about the movement, and just want to make sure that people are being fully aware of questionable elements that I would want to sit with a little bit longer and think about properly before associating and spreading this term too far without fully knowing what it means. The first thing that makes me feel a little bit iffy about 4B is the stances that they have in terms of other identities. Women should be able to do whatever the hell we want, absolutely. Especially if as a woman you are feeling unsafe about the men in your network. I have no problems whatsoever with women having autonomy over who they date and what they do with their bodies. But I do think it's easy to come away from hearing about the 4B movement and being like, it's a safe haven sanctuary for women. Sounds like heaven. But on the face of it, there are definitely signs that 4B is not as inclusive as it may seem. I'm a huge purporter, always have been, always will be, that one is not free until we are all free. And unfortunately, the official 4B movement has definitely shown signs of homophobia and transphobia. It doesn't mean that everybody who associates with 4B is of course homophobic or transphobic. That is not the case. But like with all views and all members of communities, there are going to be some mixed opinions. There are going to be some clashes, and some of these seem to be on LGBT plus rights. Those with particularly extreme views use quite derogatory language towards gay and trans people, which I think is just as disappointing to see as misogyny, if I'm being really honest with you. And these messages of inclusivity that somehow for some people seems to have turned into excluding other people goes beyond the LGBT plus community to actually inciting violence and advocating for things like revenge against men, but also other women who may not agree with what they're doing. For example, women who do decide that they want to have children, they'll view as slaves and not treat very kindly. Now, as I said, this is not all of the 4B movement, but there are definitely moments and nuggets of this extremism, which just doesn't sit well with me and also makes no logical sense. Because if you're trying to advocate for personal choice, which is where all of this is coming from, freedom and autonomy for women, right? Why is it that that also includes taking away the choice for other women? That shouldn't involve taking away the choice for women who want to have kids with men and be within any kind of family structure of which a man is involved in. I totally understand how lack of your own personal freedom and choice can lead to hate and anger. It's really sad to see when that hate and anger is then fueled into taking choice away from other people. And of course, violence is never an okay thing to do. The second point that I'd love to sit with a little bit longer in terms of the 4B movement is the impact that can have to further isolate men. And I get it. The conversation, at least in the states that I've been seeing, is all about protecting women, protecting yourself as a woman. And I really don't think it's a role of women to be like, but hang on a minute, let's think about the men as we do this. At the same time though, I do think that we'd be lying to ourselves if we didn't recognize that a lot of the problematic views that we have in today's society of men towards women come from the fact that they haven't been raised sensitively to any kind of journey that lies outside the privilege of men. It is true, if the horribly misogynistic men had different past experiences where they were exposed and taught of the importance of treating women with respect and as equals, there would be far less misogynistic and horrible men out there today. I don't have the answers to this, but I would hazard a guess that if everybody was to join the 4B movement and there was to be a total separation between men and women, it would only lead to men understanding women even less than they do now. Because what we'd be doing is providing even less of an opportunity for men to understand the importance of seeing what women go through. And again, autonomy is a crux of this, right? Every person should be doing what they feel safe doing. It is not your responsibility to baby other people. At the same time, the rippling effects of that don't just harm men being less exposed and therefore more ignorant and therefore less able to reach this like ideal standard, right, of genuine harmony and genuine perception of equality. I think it could really end up harming a lot of women too, because the results of men being even more ignorant is that the women that do associate with them, whether it be these trad wives, these women who are voting red for whatever bloody reason, they are still going to be treated worse and worse and worse as a result of that ignorance. And I'm just not sure if that's like a great move? I don't know, maybe I'm not thinking radically enough, but it's definitely a point that is just not sitting right with me. And the third and final point that doesn't sit quite right with me in the 4B movement is how this all comes into play and works in terms of sexuality. As an LGBT plus person myself, who's gone through quite the journey, as I'm sure many of you will know, in terms of my sexuality and being told who I can and cannot love, I can tell you firsthand that that is not a nice feeling. A lot of my loved ones is LGBT plus, a lot of my community is LGBT plus, and there is a reason that we are still fighting so goddamn hard to make sure that things like conversion therapy are made fully illegal, because not being able to act upon your attraction and act upon your love has a hugely detrimental impact, not just to your well-being, but to your inner core and sense of self. Most importantly, anybody who advocates for LGBT plus rights will be the first to tell you that you are not in control of who you are attracted to. It is not a choice. If it were, trust me, I'm sure a lot of people would choose not to be attracted to men. But the sometimes sad reality is that we can't change that. In some ways, the forcefulness of 4B being like, no, you cannot marry, you cannot have relationships, you cannot with men, it's also saying no, forcefully, you cannot act on who you are attracted to. And I get it, it's a choice. People are not being forced to join the 4B movement. This is something that you voluntarily enter into. But I'm just being really honest and vulnerable with you here. It doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel right that the leading factor of that has so many parallels to the controversial therapies and practices that are often used, still used today, to try and turn LGBT plus people into not being LGBT plus people. And we all know that that doesn't end well. Overall, I guess the long-lasting effects depends on how all of this is enforced. I can see how 4B can go from this really cool, empowering message of, remember women, you have a choice. You don't need to be with these scummy men. You don't need to be with people who make you feel unsafe. You have options. To just another way of women not being able to choose for themselves because someone else in a position of authority is being like, we said no this, we said no that. Because, and don't take this out of context when I say it, not all men are gross. And if a woman wants to be with a man and that man is creating a safe environment for them and their family, I don't see any problems with that. And I see just as much of a problem with a blanket ban that judges someone based just on the fact of their gender marker, in the same way that women are facing the biggest issues of the world right now. I personally would much rather be advocating for a world where the end result is that men are capable of being respectful and decent to women, and women are capable of being respectful and decent to men, instead of a world where there is such a drastic division in men and women not integrating. And maybe 4B, with this tear it down and build it up again approach, where that can happen. But it definitely feels like there's a lot of sensitivity that could get in the way. All of this to say that I do think the current discourse on 4B is intriguing, and at the very least will help women, particularly in the States, feel a lot more empowered with their ability to make decisions. And personally, I quite like the fact that this current discourse recognizes that this fight for women's rights does not start or is only situated in America. It is a resistance that belongs on the worldwide stage, and a lot of white-dominating communities have ignored the plight of women in POC countries for far too long. We are living in some wild times at the moment, and regardless of your decision, I urge you to think for yourself, to do your research, and to look out for yourself. And now I have to do that thing, because I got bills to pay, that kind of fits in well with this very dystopian world that we are living in. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more. I used to do these video essay brain farty type videos a lot, and I don't know quite why I stopped, but this just felt important to talk about. Let me know if you want to see it more. For now, I will love you and leave you. Be kind and have a great day. Bye.